Welcome back, Sports Office viewers. Julian Martinez here, and as we continue our road to the Cotton Bowl, got to bring in another Buckeyes expert, Doug Lesmerises of the Kings of the North College Football YouTube channel. Doug, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Now, before the cameras start rolling here, you were actually telling me that one of the first games you covered for Ohio State was actually against Texas, so kind of a full circle moment for you here.
Yeah, the very first game I covered was 2005, Vince Young in Texas in Ohio Stadium. That Texas win, I covered the Texas USC Rose Bowl national championship game that year, and then I was down to Austin in 2006 for that 1-2 game with Ohio State and Texas then. So I realized then, covering these two programs, how similar they are in size and scope, in resources, in sort of being the face of these two hotbed states of football in Texas and Ohio. So ton of similarities between the Longhorns and the Buckeyes that I was introduced to very, very quickly.
It feels as though it's almost like a Christmas come early moment here, because we weren't expecting this game for obviously another 9 months. They open the season next year, and we get to see it here early. So am I sensing a budding cross-conference rivalry?
Absolutely. Before this season on our show, we did a whole episode on Arch Manning versus Julian Sayin, those two great young quarterbacks who should be the starters when the Longhorns and Buckeyes open next year. We were looking a year ahead then of what these two programs are and will be. I mean, I can remember the discussion at times 10 years ago with conference realignment. Would Texas ever think about joining the Big-10? And again, there's just so many similarities between Texas and Ohio State. I thought the series in 05 and 06 was great. I covered the Fiesta Bowl in 08 when Texas went down the field and won that game and again against Ohio State. So I think this is a great rivalry that I'm glad they're playing in the regular season, but I am sure this will not be the last time they see each other in the postseason in this new expanded playoff.
Well, you know, you talked about the quarterbacks next year. The quarterbacks this year are still pretty good. So Quinn Ewers, that's obviously one of the big storylines to follow this one. Is it a revenge game for Quinn, or is it more so for the Ohio State fans? Who has the biggest axe to grind here?
Yeah, I think that was right at the beginning of this new world, right, of NIL and, Quinn coming here as a freshman at Ohio State and getting to take advantage of some endorsement opportunities that he would not have in Texas at that point. So I don't know that anybody has to have an axe to grind. It was a weird situation. He always wanted to be a Longhorn, but Texas was kind of a mess back then. I think it worked out in the end. I think he's where he's supposed to be, but I did think it was a big deal when he left, that, he would not have played quite as early at Ohio State. He would have had to back up C.J. Stroud for an extra year here, but if he had stayed, he certainly, I think he would have been the starting quarterback the last 2 years here at Ohio State if he had stayed. So I think it was a loss when he left, but I think everybody kind of got it. And so I think it's more sort of like an interesting little thing that he got a couple snaps as a Buckeye. I'm sure they'll show it during the game. Quinn Ewers in an Ohio State uniform, but it's more of an example of like the weird evolution of college football. But in the end, I think it all worked out as it should have, and it's kind of cool that they're facing off here.
Well, when they show those old highlights, he obviously had a lot more hair to work with back then, had the mullet still rocking at that point. But you mentioned you cover all the northern teams there, so you have to feel pretty good about how this whole college football playoff system has worked out, because we're looking at potentially an all Big-10 national championship. SEC overrated? I don't know. You tell me.
I've been saying it for 4 months that the SEC is overrated, and finally people believe me. So I've been calling this all year, and I feel like the rest of the world is catching up to what we've been saying on Kings of the North. I think there's a perception in the sport that is not true anymore. I think NIL and the transfer portal has flattened things out. The SEC and the South has come down. The North and the Big-10 has risen up, and the result is what we have right now. It doesn't mean the North is better, but clearly it's as good. And so I think a lot of people are just coming running around, especially to Penn State and Notre Dame. People know how good Ohio State is, but this is like, I've been shouting about this since April. Like, this is not news to us. It might be news to the rest of the country, but I've been claiming that the SEC is mid. And I have respect for Texas as a program, but there's a lot of comparisons that, for instance, that have been made between like Texas and Penn State. You know, who did you really beat? But I thought Texas, not, made their own luck in some ways, but of all the teams, I picked Texas to win the SEC this year. They were the team I liked the most down there. But the fact that Bama and Georgia and teams like that aren't at this point doesn't surprise me at all.
This college football playoff format, too, obviously benefited Ohio State because things didn't go so well in that Michigan game. It's been, their bugaboo for the last few years. And now Ryan Day, he went from having the hottest of hot seats to things got tempered. Now you get a couple blowout wins, and suddenly things are feeling A-OK over there in Columbus. How do you think he's approaching this one now that a little bit of the heat is off him?
Yeah, I mean, they knew the deal. They did this to themselves with a fourth straight Michigan loss. And, whatever happens here does not wipe that away. But I talk a lot about Ohio State having two paths right now that aren't really connected. One is the you've got to beat Michigan path, and then the one is the contend for a national title path. So they failed on the other path for 4 years, but they're in great shape on the national championship path. And so just never the structure of this. I like the 12-team playoff. I'm glad it's here, but never in the history of our sport would a team like Ohio State have had a chance to do this. They would have blown it. They would have blown it with the Michigan game. The idea that, that how many great teams had the loss they couldn't overcome, whether it was a 2-team playoff or a 4-team playoff. So Ohio State's taking advantage of the opportunity here. They are, I think, the most talented team in the country. They looked like that at times this year, but not all the time. And the Michigan loss was a shocker. But I think everybody, and especially here in Columbus, knew this was in there, the way they've played against Tennessee and Oregon. You knew it was in there, which is why people were so frustrated by the Michigan loss, because they knew the talent. And now you see it. And now it's like, okay, here they are, but they're lucky that it's the year 2024, now 2025, and not any other season in college football history, because otherwise they'd be sitting at home with regret.
Now, it's easy to get lost in the offensive weapons because both these teams just have so many, but both of them seem very defensive driven. And when you actually look at it, Ohio State coming in with one of the best defenses in the country. And I'm thinking about this whenever I think about Texas's schedule versus Georgia. Those two games, Georgia runs in with a hot defense, and it was one of the big reasons those two games ended like they did. Tell me about some of the big time playmakers that Sark and company have to plan around.
Yeah, it starts with Caleb Downs, sophomore safety, a transfer from Alabama, was a 5-star recruit that Ohio State really thought it was going to get out of high school and lost out in part because of NIL. And then once Nick Saban retired, he came to Ohio State. He's as good, I think, as any sophomore in the country. He's even with all these veteran guys at Ohio State that could have gone to the NFL and stayed. He's the best player on that defense. And he's sort of playing like a half linebacker, half safety role. He's right in the middle of the field. He's a factor on almost every play, and he is a tremendous playmaker at the safety spot. And then the other thing that's really happened for them, they have a couple of linebackers that will really run to the ball and make plays, Cody Simon and Sonny Styles, but their front four have really been getting after it. They were able to get pressure against Oregon with only blitzing about 10% of the time. And that's 2 fourth-year guys on the edge, both former 5-star recruits. Jack Sawyer, who's a Columbus kid, and JT Tuimoloau, who's from Seattle. So like very different paths to get to Ohio State. They were both among the top 10 players in the country in their class. They both could have gone to the NFL. They both stayed. They've both been important players for 4 years. But that ability against the great tackles for Texas, that matchup, can they get pressure without forcing Ohio State to blitz is going to be, I think, a huge determining factor in this game.
So tell me, Texas comes in 6-point underdogs. Wasn't expecting that coming into this one, but what is their pathway to beating this Ohio State team? Did Michigan lay out the blueprint?
It's hard. It's really hard. I actually, to your point, I thought what Ohio State did defensively against Oregon was even more impressive than what they did offensively with that Oregon offense to shut them out for the first, 27 minutes of that game. It's an uphill battle for Texas, and like the point spread is not an affront to them. I think Ohio State would be favored by that much against anybody in the country at this point. That's just when Ohio State looks like that, they're going to be viewed in that way. So I think it's tough for Texas. You know, I like Oregon. They have a more mobile quarterback. I think they have maybe better skill guys, certainly a better run game, and Ohio State shut that down. Ohio State can attack you in a bunch of ways offensively. It really, I think, is about the Texas defense and trying to make this a low-scoring game. Will Howard, the Ohio State quarterback who used to play at K-State, has played Texas before. He threw 2 back-breaking picks against Michigan, had a pick 6 against Penn State. If Texas can make those kind of plays as a defense, maybe put points on the board defensively and try to play a game in the 20s, I think that's their best shot. But that means they have to hold down Jeremiah Smith, the great freshman receiver in this Ohio State offense, which has been rolling the past couple games. But I think the Texas defense is so good. Everybody respects that. Try to keep it in the 20s and take your shot.
All right, Doug Lesmerises, Kings of the North College Football on YouTube. Thank you for joining us, man.
Thanks for having me.
For the day ones, the diehards, the first-timers, the old-timers, for all the rivalry matches, buzzer beaters, and come-from-behind miracles. It's not just stats and wins and losses, it's the moments, the shots you can't believe went in, the times you can't do anything but believe. And it's all streaming right here on your connected TV anytime on Fox Local.
The Sports Office, streaming anytime on Fox Local.